The other day, I had an idea. A lot of ideas tend to pass through my mind in a given day, random impulses I may or may not actually commit to, since I'm an easily distractible person. Sometimes cool things sprout from that, but it's mostly my downfall. When it comes to videos, I tend to write stuff down, toss it into the void of my notes app, and it usually rots there. Sometimes I even revisit the exact same idea in my mind without realizing it later down the line. Earlier this month, Nintendo officially revealed the Switch 2, where the only surprise remaining was the exact hour it dropped. 5 in the morning. At least for those on the West Coast, anyway. At the end of the video, there's an announcement for a direct covering the system in greater details coming the 2nd of April. Well, alright, I guess. Add that to the list of gaming-related things I've been holding out for. So, before that initial rumor and speculation mill begin to subside, and the Joy-Con rats start to slide, mouse cursor functionality. I figured what better way to spin the wait for further details on the Switch 2 than to go for my backlog on the Switch 1. You know, since we have to call it that now. Backlog in this context referring to games that I've actually started playthroughs of, just to keep the scope of this more reasonable. Also, I'm not counting games I've already played in full on other platforms. My second purchase of Sonic Origins can wait another day. So now, I'm gonna try committing to that idea, delving into my Switch backlog for the time being, starting with... I've played this game on and off ever since I got it back in July, but at the current time, I've only gotten as far as finishing Chapter 2 and its following intermissions. And after putting it off for over 3 months, I finally decided to resume my playthrough on the toilet. This is actually the best video game system. Look, I was gonna try and play docked so I could get as much footage as possible, but sometimes you gotta shit. Thankfully though, this game couldn't be further from the act of defecation. But it is, however, what's the nicest way to put this? It's kind of baby's first RPG. No, it's really baby's first RPG. Just by looking around a little, you'll find a mountain of status-inflicting items, which tend to be far less efficient than simply doing as much damage as possible with your regular and badge attacks. Mainly in the early game. I imagine it probably gets a bit more involved than that. You're handed permanent weapon upgrades as a part of the story, with the only wiggle room for builds being through what badges you use, and what one of your 3 stats to upgrade via level up. But the average Mario child could probably get by fine by mashing HP every time. It is the first option in the list after all. There's also the Mario RPG staple of incorporating gameplay elements from the main games, like breaking bricks and the action commands, further smoothing out the transition in genre, as well as slow battle animations for readability, full party heal on level up, non-boss enemies generally being unsophisticated, and so on. But in spite of that, and besides the legitimately fun ways the game adds depth to its simple systems, for me, the main draw to the Thousand Year Door is its take on Mario's world. Despite the fantastical coat of paint and, well, the paper aesthetic, it's not one totally unlike our own. There are people with real lives here, who live in houses and apartments, working jobs both mundane and dangerous just to get by. Rogueport, as the name implies, is a place wrought with corruption and outlaws, and it's not uncommon to get caught on the receiving end of another party's kerfuffle. There are a lot of characters here, and not all of them are that important to Mario's journey, to such a degree that Princess Peach and Bowser's presence come off more like a formality instead of notable central figures of the story. This world is so thoughtfully crafted, no pun intended, by separating itself from the monarchy of the Mushroom Kingdom into its own original setting. The game's able to fully commit itself to these strange, idiosyncratic ideas spanning every step of your adventure, Fun and cool set pieces galore. Not to mention more minor elements like how characters communicate to you via email to keep in touch, or partners having unique dialogue if they happen to be selected before a given scene, and Homestuck typing quirks. It's not hard to see how this game became a foundational piece for so many Mario fan works going forward. So when you strip away those elements, you're gonna end up with something that can still work within its own space and even excel. It just feels plain in comparison. Even looking back at the original Paper Mario, it wasn't plain. It was vanilla. It's infectious, really. And that's part of why that bathroom session went kinda wrong. I was watching a video on my phone at the same time I was playing, and I could barely comprehend the dialogue, which led to me scouring Rogueport trying to figure out what I needed to do next. It's really hard to split your attention like that. For me, at least, I have to be in a certain headspace to play most RPGs, or anything else that's similarly very story-driven, and when it's genuinely engrossing like the Thousand Year Door is, then it becomes kind of a fleeting relationship. I love this game. I just wish I could have more opportunities to play it. Another remake. Yeah. Dragon Quest was always one of those series that seemed like it'd be interesting, but the systems and loose open-ended progression would probably overwhelm and filter me for someone accustomed to simpler games like Pokemon and, well, Paper Mario. But then they got me. They fucking got me, dog. I'm not gonna act like this is the first proper JRPG series I've played. I don't think it is, but it's hard to say it didn't help me further open my eyes beyond the chicken nuggies and frozen pizzas of the genre. I started out with 1 and 2 on the Game Boy, which convinced me to go through with playing the new HD 2D remake of the third game, and man, I still barely grasp the complicated systems and open-ended progression at play, but these are some damn good spaces. Chill, even. In the NES and Game Boy games, you've got these basic-looking town maps, probably about as nice as they could look given the technical limitations of their respective hardware. But in this remake, that primitive look is reimagined in full 3D with proper hills and trees, breaking entirely free from the grid of the tile map, while still invoking a diorama aesthetic via the use of 2D character sprites through a top-down lens. Though, like plenty of recent Square Enix endeavors, the HD 2D games have been subject to critique ever since their introduction with Octopath Traveler, for being, a bit over-the-top looking. Fair enough, but personally, I really dig it. It's like the modern-day evolution of things like Grandia and plenty other 5th-gen RPGs like it. And this game in particular's got a phenomenal color palette through and through. I can't get over the contrast of warm orange lights illuminating the dim blue surroundings during the night, including the protagonist's own lantern, or the almost overwhelming haze of the sunlight making the foliage so damn green. It's difficult to convey through words, but I'd say vibrant is a good descriptor, like concept art brought to life. It does kinda run like dog shit, but that's sort of a given for this system. I'd say it adds to the experience. Some of that beauty can be somewhat attributed to the OLED Switch's vivid color mode, but it looks nice regardless. I really love how some dungeons blend the dark, decrepit look you'd expect with strangely homely, furnished parts, usually free of monsters. It feels really lived in for places you'd never expect to be lived in, let alone a desire to. I can't really think of another JRPG that does something similar. On the topic of other JRPGs, yeah, I've kinda had my plate full with them for a while now. And by JRPGs, I mean Pokemon. And by Pokemon, I mean the Nuggies. I hated all of them. No, seriously though, as much as I really like the things this game does, I still find myself falling back onto what I'm already familiar with, simply because it's more comforting. Like I said earlier, I gotta be in the right headspace for most JRPGs, and Dragon Quest is one of the more complex ones among them, relatively speaking. That might be partially attributed to a personal stigma that others have, and even I once had towards traditional JRPGs, that their stories are boring, progression confusing, battles repetitive, and generally being samey fantasy fluff. While the first few things aren't entirely untrue by nature, when it comes to Dragon Quest, its style and tone couldn't be more distinct. It isn't an overly humorless and flat fantasy setting. It has fun with its world and characters while still utilizing typical fantasy elements to enrich its world. If we look at the village of Norvik, I assume that's how that's pronounced, we see a town cursed into an eternal slumber, the inhabitants sleeping through both day and night. Later, after going on an expedition through the surrounding forest and cave, and coming back with the item to break the spell, the amount of time that passed truly begins to unravel itself. One NPC even says the day prior that he saw Ortega, your father, leaving the village in search of a magic key. Thing is though, he was slaughtered by monsters many years ago. Oh, and the spellbreaker in question is called Wakey Dust, and you obtain it from the super secret fairy village after telling the queen that her daughter and her human lover ended their lives because of the stigma against humans. It's almost jarring how Dragon Quest can shift from something so morbid to lightheartedness on a whim. It's honestly kind of silly, but you know what? I prefer it that way. It's a bit of a quirky RPG, I'd say. And these quirky little RPGs would go on to shape the whole damn genre, possibly leading to that generic fantasy preconception of JRPGs to begin with. Funny how things turn out, huh? Despite my own inclinations, I really get along with this game, even when I'm having trouble comprehending its systems, or failing to keep track of town names, or fucking, I don't know, just getting lost even with the remake's objective markers and fast travel. Though, obviously, part of the appeal of games like these is to mess around and discover things. Just that, in my case, I'm exceedingly dumb and a bit inattentive. I may be stupid, but I feel at home in the Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake. Also, there's a proto-Pokemon creature collector feature, so that's pretty cool as well. So let's play some GIGA WRECKER Alt. You know Game Freak, right? They're the minds behind classics like Pulseman, Pocket Card Jockey, Pandoland, the upcoming and mysterious Project Bloom. Oh, also Pokemon Discourse version and Controversy version. Alright, as much as I may personally adore Pulseman, Game Freak isn't exactly known for their games outside of the Giant Yellow Rat and Friends. At best, you might see a little town hero crop up in a Nintendo Direct, and at worst, it's not even published by themselves or Nintendo, being hidden far within the depths of the eShop, which is where I initially discovered it. Or it might have been on Steam, I'm not entirely sure. Regardless of that, one day, I saw that it was on sale for an extremely low price. I think it was like $2. So I picked it up using some of my fake Nintendo Gold Points money, because I have no real money. As one might tend to do, I like to carefully look over the store page of a game I'm interested in, to get a feel for what it's like and all that before I commit to a purchase. However, not even that could prepare me for what this game actually had in store. It surprised me in quite a few ways. First, it's really story-heavy. The whole conceit of this game is that, in the midst of a robotic invasion, the MC Reika Rekeji is sought out by a mysterious human girl who seemingly wants to help her, until an alarm is triggered, alerting the bots to their location and making her turn on Reika at gunpoint. As she pulls the trigger, the other girl is snatched away, leaving Reika on death's door. Had it not been for a scientist who brought her unconscious body to his lab to tend to her wounds and cybernetically enhance her body, including a new left arm in place of a lack of one, if I recall anyways. The guy that repaired your arm kinda reminds me of Kazuma Sakamoto, except weirder and more perverse. He's lame, but I think I like him, to some degree anyways. Going off the eShop screenshots, I honestly expected the game to be a bit of a clusterfuck, visually anyways. Look at this shit, can you discern anything? In practice though, you're introduced to the stuff this game has to offer at a manageable pace, so even with this 2D game's frame rate of a whopping 30, it's not too hard to grasp. Lastly, instead of having a level-based structure, it's actually a Metroidvania. I think? Okay, here's the thing. I don't actually know if this game's a Metroidvania or not, because I've never gotten past the starting tutorial area despite my best efforts. This was initially because my first play session was really short. I had some fun with what was there, but I wanted to pick it up another time when I was in the right mood. After doing so recently, something which seemed inconsequential has now snowballed into a much bigger problem. I think now's a good time to address the elephant in the room. The input-laden elephant stomping in the current space. It's bad. It's not the worst I've ever dealt with, but it's far from ideal, in my opinion. And the worst part is, it's teetering on that line. It's almost tolerable within the context of the game. Unfortunately, the game quickly goes in a direction unsuited for that level of input latency. It wants you to platform, it wants you to hit enemies at the right moment, it wants you to use its physics to catapult yourself in the air to reach an object with strict timing. Still, the underlying systems of GIGA WRECKER Alt seem genuinely interesting, and moreover, fun. I just wish those systems weren't underlying to begin with, under a thick coating of input lag. At some points, I'm having fun with these systems, I'm in the zone, but other times, I'm continuously hurling myself at a puzzle with my character's jarring acceleration in hopes of making it work. Is it even just the input lag? How much is my fault? I don't know why it's like this. I assume the broad weirdness and control is accentuated by the Switch version, presumably from the lack of hardware capability or something like that. I would imagine the other platforms fare significantly better in that regard. I'm not that much of a puzzle game guy to begin with, but I've still been able to resonate with some, even in spite of my inability to put 2 and 2 together sometimes. But with this game, I don't know what to think. Straight up, I haven't felt this conflicted about a game in a very long time. I hope I haven't been repeating myself too much during this segment, because that's what every play session with this game has felt like. Learning something new that makes the play experience more enjoyable, then proceeding to run into a wall for 10 to 20 minutes, giving up or miraculously figuring something out, and then putting it down. To any weirdos who heard everything I said and are interested in playing this game, I'd recommend one of the other ports. There's also a PC version, but it's apparently an older version minus the alt part. Not sure what's good with that. Never complain about Pokemon's shortcomings until you play this game's Switch version. You do not understand what true anguish is like. Though the character designs are stellar, I'll give this game that. You can definitely see the influence from Game Freak's other franchise bleeding through in that regard. But for now, I think I'd rather leave this game be. Maybe someday I can really get into it, on the Switch or otherwise. Okay, I think now's a good time for a palate cleanser. How about, this one? It's Final Fantasy VII. Fuck you want me to say? Alright, maybe I might have something to say. As much as I've avoided acknowledging it directly, you may be starting to see a pattern forming with the kinds of games on my Switch backlog. Regardless of the country of origin, RPGs tend to be very long games with a lot of intricacies, thus a lot of moving parts to get stuck on for one reason or another, and in one way or another, including disinterest. Final Fantasy VII is a pretty interesting game, but I'm fucking stupid. Up until fairly recently, I found myself pretty damn lost during the wall market segment, where you go around gathering stuff for a disguise to sneak into a mansion to regroup with Tifa. Let me tell you, this honestly might have been the most monumental puzzle I've ever tackled throughout all of last year, at least to my immediate recollection. From June to December, I scoured the wall market for any of the clothes and accessories based on the dates on these screenshots. Which sounds absolutely devastating, but this was probably over the course of around 4 play sessions, I'd say. Not exactly a game I'd come back to frequently for that very reason, but the tribulations were worth it to see the cloud with unwavering swag. From there, I moved forth. As it turns out, the Final Fantasy VII is pretty cool and has a captivating narrative, even in spite of its questionable translation. Which I already knew beforehand, but even from just Midgar alone, it's easy to see why they made 10,000 sequels and prequels and remakes and live service spin-offs set in this world. That and money. But man, I don't know. I kinda wanna settle in Midgar a bit longer. Making progress is good and all, but sometimes it's nice to just let a game linger in your mind a little instead of blazing through it. So let's turn this palate cleanser into palate cleansers. Alright, so here's an interesting one. Quake 2 came out the same year as FF7, funnily enough, but I picked up the game's remaster pretty much right when it released not too long ago. The remaster is great, by the way, absolutely packed with extra content and even playable developmental materials. You could easily sink hours and hours into all the added stuff, but for our purposes, let's keep it to the main campaign. Last time, I got to the start of what I assume is actually the game's last level. I do in fact play games beyond the opening hours, just to be clear. FPS games can be pretty demanding, but I can handle them fairly well, especially with gyro aim when it comes to consoles. Always a nice thing to have. Shit, I ran out of storage on my PC during the recording. I got, what, a little over 20 minutes into the level? 7 gigs over a 27-minute recording. Got about 9 left on my second hard drive. How long are these levels again? Oh. I think that's probably a sign I should move on to something else. The games on the NSO apps count towards this, right? Yeah, they do. Corking up my JRPG before gravity catapults it back down. Call that shit Earthbound. Honestly, I think I might have gone too far in the other end of the scale. I'm running circles around town with this mushroom on my head. I'm getting my ass kicked by plants and UFOs. I'm going for joyrides on my bike, and... oh yeah, I got the power of freaking PSI on my side. Well, in theory anyways, I don't have any PP to use it with currently, so it's not exactly an option. This is just too weird. I can't handle this. How about another SNES backlogger? The cartridge version of this game was re-released pretty recently, only about 3 weeks ago as of the time of writing. I've actually used some of its music before for my videos, but this release pushed me towards playing the game for more than 5 minutes at max. One small issue though, I can't read Japanese. Just like most other import titles on NSO, Suteha-kun has been left completely untranslated. I can sort of get by, but this game has a lot of text for a puzzle game, and some of it can be necessary to understand the gameplay mechanics, so I actually can't really play it. Besides, I'm stuck here and I can't get out. Help me. Ugh, maybe I should look elsewhere other than NSO. Oh yeah, there's always Xanadu. Look, it's easy to write off older PC games as being way too archaic for any well-adjusted person to play nowadays, let alone when it comes to capital C computer RPGs. NES and Famicom are already teetering on that edge of accessibility for plenty, making this shit look damn near alien in comparison. But I'm gonna take a stand against that, and more specifically, in defense of Xanadu. With that said, I don't like looking at this. Man, there's gotta be one other thing, one other game in my Switch 1 backlog that's ripe for playing, or whatever euphemism is the most appropriate. And honestly, I think I might know what that may be. Let me set the stage. After having put it off for nearly 2 years, in late 2018, I finally got my first Switch. Honestly, it's weird to think about in retrospect. I still kept up with the directs and the general discourse surrounding the system in that early era, but I just wasn't interested in having one at that time. I think Smash Ultimate was the thing that pushed me over the edge. When I finally got one, I had 3 games. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, of course, Undertale, and Mega Man 11. They were all really damn good, making for a stellar introduction to how the Switch could reshape and enhance the play experience, being a hybrid portable and all. I couldn't begin to tell you how many hours I sunk into Smash Ultimate over those first few months. It's really a once-in-a-lifetime kind of game. And Undertale, well, I already played it years prior, but it was nice to do another playthrough of it, as well as getting to experience the new stuff in the Switch port. Mega Man 11 was kind of the odd one out, all things considered. I wanted a third game to round out my initial library, so I picked up what was at the time the Blue Bomber's big comeback, essentially on a whim. Nevertheless, I still liked it from what I recall, though I never got too far in it at the time. Actually, I didn't even get past the first stage. From then onwards, that small library of mine would slowly grow as new games came out like Mario Maker 2, as well as getting to catch up on older releases like Breath of the Wild. And even when the system didn't get certain third-party heavy hitters, or otherwise in a poor state, there were still so many great games of all kinds that it helped soften the blow, at the very least. Yet, I rarely touched Mega Man 11 throughout it all. While I didn't bring it anywhere I went, whenever I went on vacation, I'd always pack my Switch alongside a few games, and one of the games I'd always default to was Mega Man 11, in hopes that maybe I could actually make progress or even finish the game. And unfortunately, I didn't, really. Maybe an attempt at a stage, but far from the latter. And over 6 years later, I've only more recently gotten around to defeating the first 5 Robot Masters. I still have yet to beat Mega Man 11. Like I said, whenever I do find myself playing it, I'm having fun. So, why is that? What's been keeping me from playing this game extensively? Do I just not care for Mega Man all that much? Do I have too many other games on my hands? General lack of time? Well, the game's fucking hard. No better way to put it. And yeah, sure, this game does have difficulty options, but it's a hard game no matter which way you spin it. There are some other factors contributing to me having never beaten this game, but that's the main thing. Fuck my stupid mega life. You might have already guessed by now, but I haven't actually finished any of these games, not even after returning to them for this video. And that's because I personally think the backlog is stupid. Or maybe just backlog culture in particular. I don't say this to condescend among those who dare value finishing the game that likely costed them money, because that's even fucking stupider. For me anyways, I feel it's a bit more complicated than that. My impulses can drive me towards games on a whim, paid or otherwise, new or otherwise, and not all games are digestible within a couple hours, or even a couple dozen hours. You're not beating Totic under an hour unless you're a demigod speedrunner who can set world records with no prior experience. And as much as I may find myself drawn towards the same old, having a varied backlog to play at a given moment helps prevent fatigue down the line. It's fun to check up on a game you're halfway through after some time removed, whether that sacred finish line is days away or perhaps even years away, whichever way the cookie crumbles. Hell, I start playthroughs of games just to grab a bit of footage for my videos, and I don't typically pick them back up afterwards. Do those games count as backloggers? There are consequences to treating your backlog with tremendous weight, and while I can't say I'm entirely unbothered by the prospect of unbeaten games, it's not as much an existential threat as it seems to be for others. Barring a bit of anguish, I still love each and every game I've discussed throughout this video, just that, as you might expect, optimizing through a backlog is not an optimal way to experience any piece of media. So I didn't, which made the time I did spend feel all the more meaningful. There were multiple instances of gaps between my play sessions, because I thought playing docked with a capture setup would be too cumbersome, which sometimes forced me to go back and record new footage, or alternatively, you know. Which feels like a major testament to how wonderful the Switch's titular feature is. It's quite literally the main reason I've barely touched my Balance Station 5, especially with a PC on hand. As the Switch generation draws to a close, with its successor looming on the horizon, it's hard not to linger on those 8 long years a little bit, both the system's own legacy and how it could be iterated upon, for the better or perhaps something more lateral. God knows the amount of speculation going around on that front, both before and after that announcement trailer. So let me weigh in on that while I have the chance. What do I want out of Nintendo's next system? Pushing aside the obvious bullet points like improved image quality, higher frame rates, better online, a more responsive interface, oh god, it just keeps going. Regardless, here's what I'd like on a macro scale. I want a piece of hardware that not only allows more games to exist on the platform through sheer power, but also enables new experiences through experimentation, even if that leads to gimmicks too frivolous to see widespread adoption. It's called Switch 2, so I'd like something truly worthy of that incremental name. Not exactly an inventive take, but it's the best I got. And with what little information we have about it currently, it looks like it's already headed in that direction. So that's pretty neat. To repeat myself for the umpteenth time, video games are cool. I want to see them continue to innovate and evolve themselves, whether it's the software itself, the hardware that brings them to life, or the play experience formed by the synergy of both. And above all else, I'd like to give more of them a shot.
Here's the latest update on Pokemon Legends ZA.
A lot of these have to do with ZA. Yeah. Yes! It looks like shit! Oh fuck yes! I love France!
Yippee! Yippee! I like Kalos, I like New City, I like everything about this Paris